Okay, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us this evening for our Septic Sense Workshop. I'm Rowena Graham, a lawn care technician with Clearwater County. Our speaker tonight is Rick Baxter, board member with the Alberta On-Site Wastewater Management Association. Rick is heavily involved in co-development and training for the private sewage industry, and as a safety officer, Rick is well versed in all the ins and outs of septic systems. So before we start, just a couple housekeeping points. Please keep your cameras off to limit distractions during the presentation. You should also have seen a notice at the top of your screen that this presentation will be recorded and it's going to be posted to the county YouTube page. So if you have to step out early, you can finish watching it there. If there are any questions throughout the presentation, you can type them into the chat box or wait until the break to ask them. And lastly, if you wish to purchase a Septic Sense package after the webinar, they can be ordered directly through the Alberta On-Site Wastewater Management Association website. And with that, I will turn things over to Rick.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, my name is Rick Baxter. I'm getting a lot of feedback. There we go. I think the mic is done now. All right. I'm on the board of directors for the Alberta On-Site Wastewater Management Association. I am a safety codes officer, which is just a fancy way of saying inspector. I'm involved in a lot of the code development, and I am the chair of the private sewage subcouncil. So all of that means that I am considered a subject matter expert. I'm here to present to you tonight for Septic Sense Solutions for Rural Living. I will take questions as we go. We've got Sherry Hallett who's going to be paying attention there for me, giving me a heads up if we've got any questions. Typically, this would have been a 3-hour presentation if we were in person and I was, basically stomping around in front of you, but it has been shortened up a little bit to reflect the online format. So we're not going to take anywhere near 3 hours. I will stick around afterwards to answer any questions that anybody might have. Keep in mind, I do travel around the province a lot as an SCO, and I do work in most areas of the province, but that's not the hat that I'm wearing tonight. So if you've got any questions, I'm not going to drill down to figure out where your site is and come there and make your life miserable or anything silly like that. I'm just here to help you out. So with that, we'll get moving. Took care of the introduction. This is presented by the Alberta On-Site Wastewater Management Association, or AOMA. AOMA takes care of the majority of the training for private sewage installers throughout the province. We advocate on behalf of the private sewage industry to government, and being involved in the industry, try to keep everybody on the straight and narrow, try to educate homeowners, contractors, builders, the government, and everybody else in all things septic. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to talk about an introduction to septic. So I'm not going to make anybody an expert tonight. I mean, we're not going to get that done in a couple of hours. I'm going to give you basically a 30,000-foot view of what a septic system is. So what is it? The goals of sewage treatment. Why do we care? How do you find your septic system? How a septic system works? We're going to talk about some initial treatment components, and then we're going to talk about final treatment components. We'll, of course, talk about regulations, because like everything else in life that has a potential to impact other people or the environment, there are regulations or laws involved in here. We're going to talk a little bit about design and installation, but again, it's going to be that 30,000-foot view. We're going to talk about appropriate use of your septic system, how to maintain it, and how to do a little bit of really basic troubleshooting. So we'll give you enough knowledge that when you leave this tonight, you have a better understanding about what the septic system is all about, and be able to decide for yourself how much you want to be involved in it, or you'll have some idea of different people that you can call to kind of help you out through the process, whether you're just a user of a septic system, if you are planning on having one installed, or if you're looking at maybe getting into the industry, doing the installs and the maintenance work yourself. So what is a septic system? Septic systems, these are private systems. Okay, they're for the collection and treatment of wastewater generated by a home or a business on a rural property that's not connected to municipal services. So we're not connected to the big pipe at all. It typically includes a soil-based treatment component and everything is disposed of on site. That doesn't mean that we don't also have holding tanks, but the vast majority of the systems that are installed do send the septage back into the soil for final treatment. Our sources of wastewater, we're talking about human and animal waste and household wastewater. It's typically, we're not going to have any sort of industrial process water or anything like that going into these. That is an important environment that would be looking after that. So what are the goals of sewage treatment? The goal of a septic system is to treat and disperse the sewage and effluent on site so that it doesn't present any risk to the public health and does not cause degradation of the environment. So if we install these systems correctly, design them properly, maintain them properly, and don't abuse them, these septic systems work very well, and we don't cause any issues to the environment. We don't pollute the water table. We don't have a big swampy mess. We don't have people getting sick from our sewage. Everything is treated and we are recycling. So did you know wastewater is a mix of black water and gray water? Both must be treated by your septic system. So black water is any water that's coming out of your toilet. Gray water is everything else that's coming out of your sinks and your washing machine, your dishwasher, all that sort of stuff. That's all gray water. So as much as we'd like to think that gray water is cleaner than black water, when we do what we do with the bathroom, we're cleaning up, we're washing our hands, getting the fecal coliforms down in the drain there. Our clothes, we're washing all the bacteria and everything else off of our clothes. That's all going down to the septage. So it all needs to be treated. We can't just take the gray water and dump it onto the surface and call it a day. So there are a number of people that I've dealt with over the years that consider getting a composting toilet. So composting toilet, everything that comes out of your body goes into this toilet and it composts it. And then that takes care of your black water, and then all the gray water goes into their septic system. Composting toilet, the contents of that, when you go to empty that, still needs to find its way into a wastewater stream someplace. So it's either going to go into your septic tank, or it's going to go to a sewage treatment plant, or if your municipal dump will accept it, which odds are they won't, you might be able to take it there and then they dispose of it as hazardous waste. So a composting toilet, it does its job. It desiccates the waste, but we still have to treat it as if it is just regular waste. So you might want to consider not doing the composting toilet, because the additional bacterial load that we get from the black water will help your septic system work quite a bit better. 1 in 5 Albertans have septic systems. There is a lot of properties in Alberta that are not connected to the big pipe. Most of you have these sites, and they are very prevalent, as I know, because I inspect a lot of them every year. We treat over 30 million gallons every single day with private sewage systems. So you can imagine that if the systems were not maintained properly, if they were not designed and built properly, we'd have a fairly significant mess in this province. So if you've got a septic system and you're trying to figure out where is it, you know, we might have a septic system out there. We know we've probably got a tank. Maybe we've got something else. So how do we find this thing? So you can look for some as-built drawings or a home inspection. That's kind of hit and miss. As-built drawings for newer systems, they should have been included with the septic system when it was built for you. And hopefully that's been passed along. But when we start getting into the older systems, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, good luck. You're not going to find that. Home inspection, maybe the home inspectors, the guys that do the inspections for real estate transactions, they might be able to track that down for you. They might be able to give you some advice on that. But definitely ask if you're getting that type of service done, because the vast majority of them don't go anywhere near the septic system. They look at what's immediately around the building and inside the building alone. You can have a look out in your yard for lids, manhole covers, inspection covers, some pipes sticking up, or mystery caps, some plastic caps out there that you're not quite sure what they're there for, but if you take the cap off, it might smell a little bit. That's a good way to find your septic system. If you've got a mystery bale out on your lawn with a piece of plywood underneath it, that's probably going to be where your septic tank is. If you do want to go out there and confirm that, don't step on the plywood, please. Take that bale off and then walk backwards with the plywood. Don't walk forwards, because equal or greater odds that there is no actual lid on that septic tank, and that piece of plywood may or may not actually support your weight. And if you pick it up and walk forward, you might get wet. You can contact a septic maintenance provider or a pumper. They can come out. They can have a look for this thing for you. They might be able to locate it. Hopefully, if it's a local guy, they might have been out there in the past to actually empty the contents once in a while, and they should be able to track that down for you. Or another hit or miss is get a copy of the septic permit from your municipality or permitting agency. So different areas of the province, some do have the municipal government that looks after permitting. A lot of areas do not. They fall under the Alberta Safety Codes Authority, or ASCA. They may also have fallen under Alberta Municipal Affairs if it was over 5 years ago. So it might take a little bit of hunting in order to be able to track down the permit. And even then, if it's been the last, say, 15 years, you might have some luck finding the permit. Going back further than that, record keeping was nowhere near as good as it should have been. So you might not be able to track anything down that way. So how does a septic system work? Well, you see that we've got this picture here, and I'm going to get my laser pointer out. All right. So we've got our house here, and we come down, we go to a septic tank. From the septic tank, this is showing us a septic field. You might have a septic mound or an open discharge or whatever the case might be, but this is kind of a typical type of system. So with this, we've got a septic field. So we've got trenches with pipe coming along. This is underneath the ground. You can see we've got nice green grass. We've got evaporation. We've got flow going down. And then this kind of blue-gray area, this is our water table. So what we've got is we're bringing water up from our well point, up the well, into the house. We do what we're going to do with the water. We're washing, we're cooking, we're cleaning, everything else. That all goes down to the septic tank, where it sits for a period of time, and then it goes out into your septic field. Now, it used to be thought that when the effluent went out to the septic field, the vast majority of it went up for evaporation. Scientists got involved, and we figured that only maybe about 5% of the sewage that goes into the field is actually being brought up by evaporation and, plant growth and that sort of thing. The vast majority of it goes back down. Now, we can have a water table down below here if our septic system is built, designed, and maintained properly. What that means is underneath this trench, with just regular effluent coming out of a septic tank, I need to have 5 feet of soil between the bottom of this trench and my water table in order to be able to say that that water is now treated to the extent that it needs to be considered potable again. If we don't have 5 feet here, then we've got partially or God forbid untreated effluent that is then going into the water table. And then when an effluent gets into a water table, it typically kind of follows that underground stream. It doesn't dilute much, doesn't disperse a whole heck of a lot. It stays in what they call a narrow plume, and it just kind of follows along with that water until it finds a way out. So it might find a way out through a lake, river, or stream. Or, worst case scenario, it comes up through a well point, up through a well, and goes into somebody's building. It might be your own. It might be somebody a few miles down the road. There's no real way to tell whose system it's going to come out from. So we definitely want to make sure that we are maintaining our systems properly so that we don't cause any sort of issues. So how does our septic tank work? So a septic tank provides a mechanical separation of the sewage. So your fat, oil, and grease, or fog, and your lighter inorganics float to the top of the septic tank in the primary chamber and creates what's called the scum layer. The heavier inorganics all kind of sink down to the bottom, becomes what's called the sludge layer, And then the middle kind of clear zone, that gets carried over to the second compartment, and that's what we dose out to our septic field or to our open discharge, or goes out to our mound or what have you. Okay. This septic tank creates what's called a primary strength effluent. So it's cleaning up somewhat. It's kind of sort of clear when it's going out. Definitely still bad for you, still bacteria laden, and viruses and everything else can all be in there. But it's cleaner than when you flush the toilet. Okay. And a septic tank is not a holding tank. A holding tank, just everything goes into it. It does exactly what a holding tank sounds like. It holds on to it. Then you get a suck truck to come out. The guy sticks the hose down there and empties that tank out for you on a regular basis. Holding tank typically has a single compartment. Septic tank has two compartments because we're doing some treatment and then we're pushing it off from there. So here's an example of a septic tank. So here's ground level here. And we want to see about 4 feet of earth cover over top of the tank. Now, some tanks, some plastic tanks will not accept a 4-foot burial. Some tanks will accept more. If you can't get at least 4 feet of burial, we get an R7 insulation put over top of anything that's shallower than 4 feet, just to be able to avoid having any sort of freezing issues and whatnot in our tank. So here's our inlet from our house, and it comes in. And then we've got a T in here to kind of slow things down, start our separation. So here's our scum layer with the fat, oil, and grease here. Here's our sludge layer with the heavier inorganics. And this clear zone, that's our clarified somewhat primary strength effluent. You can see another T here. It spills over into the pump chamber, the dosing chamber, whatever you want to call it. And in here, we will have a little bit of, sludge and scum that'll come over into here. It's just the way things are. And then we've got a pump. Now, what this picture doesn't show is it doesn't show an alarm. Septic systems in the last 15 or so years have all needed to have alarms installed, with everything except for a holding tank underneath an outhouse. And all septic systems for about the same period of time have required a filter, with the exception of a holding tank. You can't put a filter in a holding tank. That filter can come in here into the crossover. It can be over top of this pump as a pump vault, or you'll have piping coming up this way, coming across, back down into the outlet, and it can be along in this piping here as a filter. We got primary strength effluent out of here. So typically everything comes into here for a day or two, spills over to here, and then this is what we're pumping out. And this goes out this way to, again, the mound, the field, what have you. Now, you could also have a bell and siphon, which you wouldn't have the pump down here. You'd have a contraption of piping here. And basically when this fills up, it starts a siphon action and it drains it down until the siphon is broken and makes the gurgling sound, kind of like what your toilet makes when you're using that in the house. Another type of initial treatment component we can have. So we know that the septic tank gives us primary treated effluent. We can put advanced treatment units in, and the advanced treatment units, they produce a secondary treated effluent or a higher quality effluent. It's a lot cleaner. It smells less, but it still has bacteria. It still has the viruses and whatnot in there, just to a much lesser extent. It's a lot cleaner. We still have to push it out to the soil. We still have to get that final clarification in the soil. So these can be aerobic treatment units. They fixed film attached growth treatment units. Basically, a sewage treatment plant needs to be approved, and there, as long as it's an approved sewage treatment plant, you can use it. Now, with the sewage treatment plants at your home, think about the big sewage treatment plants that a municipality has, but a lot smaller scale, just to be able to handle your house or your small business. Okay, some of them will allow you to monitor them, that they're coming out with apps for them and everything else. You can have remote monitoring where an installer or maintenance provider is able to keep track of what's going on with it and know when they have to come out and do a little bit of maintenance on it. So we've got some examples of different package treatment plants. So this one here, this is an attached growth system. So here's our inlet pipe, and everything's spilling into here on our pre-treatment compartment. Comes through, comes to our treatment compartment, and here's an attached treatment material for the bacteria to adhere to. Now, what the difference is between a regular septic tank and an advanced treatment unit is a regular septic tank is an anaerobic environment. So we're not adding any oxygen to it. There's very little oxygen in it. The bacteria that's in there feasts on everything in that tank. It doesn't require oxygen to do it. Whereas an advanced treatment unit, we have oxygen in there. So we've got an aerator. It's pushing oxygen in here. So it's an aerobic environment. And aerobic bacteria is a lot more voracious than anaerobic bacteria. It does a much better job, and that's how we're able to get a better treatment in these systems. So we got our aerator, and then it comes through a settling compartment, and then it discharges out. Now, packaged sewage treatment plants, some of them have another tank added to it. Others, you need to put a separate tank in front. It's called a trash tank. So things that are not supposed to go into your septic system fall out into the trash tank or the trash compartment on the package treatment plant. That way it doesn't go into your system, doesn't come through and start fouling everything up. And we'll talk about stuff that you shouldn't be flushing a little bit later on. But just know that we have to treat these systems with a little bit of respect, because if we abuse it, it's going to get expensive. So here's another one. It's a textile packaged plant. So everything comes out of the house here, comes into our plant, into our tank. It pumps out of this tank, comes through this area here, our filter cloth, and then it eventually goes into our septic field. And in here you can see we've got our treatment cloth. This is basically like your attached growth media that we saw in the previous tank. It's just done differently. Both totally approved systems. Either one of them can be used. It's basically buyer's choice. Your installer might have a preference to use these people's packaged plant rather than those people's. They're all tested. They all do the same job. Another example is mechanical gear-driven plant, and you can see everything goes into it, and it just keeps spinning things around in order to get your treatment. Just at this point, sewage treatment plants, it's a difference between Ford, Dodge, and Chevy. It's whatever you decide that you want to have. Big thing to have in mind here is here's our sewage that we've got. So this is sewage before going through the packaged plant, and this is sewage when it comes out of the packaged sewage treatment plant. So you can see how big of a difference there is. We've got the little bit of fog on the top here. We've got the heavier inorganics here, still settling out. It's still really cloudy. And when it comes over to here, it's fairly obvious how much of a change that makes. Coming out of a septic tank, it's a lot closer to the first picture than the second picture, but it's definitely an improvement. So once we've gone through our primary treatment, so whether we're going to go with a septic tank or we're going to go with secondary treatment or treatment plant, then we have to go to our final treatment component. And final treatment for this presentation is always going to be going into the soils. There's a few other options that involve engineers and a lot of really professional designs and stuff like that, like manufactured wetlands and that sort of thing. But for our purposes, we just talk about the soils portion of everything. So final treatment components could be septic fields. You might call them weeping laterals, dispersal trenches, treatment fields. We've got open discharges where we're just pumping out on the surface if you've got enough land for that. We've got at-grade systems. We've got mounds. We'll talk about a couple of those coming forward. But with this picture, you can see that in the foreground, this is where we have our header. And then our individual trenches, we got one here, another one here, and you can see the soil piled up for the other ones. With a septic field, this trench depth is a maximum 3 feet, because when we get out to the soils, it's aerobic bacteria out there that is doing the final polishing. And we need to have a set amount of soil that this effluent is getting applied to, so there's enough oxygen in that soil in order to be able to affect proper treatment. So the maximum trench depth is 3 feet. If we have primary treated effluent going into a septic field like this, we need to have 5 feet below that trench of decent soil that the system can actually be applied to. If we're using a packaged treatment plant, we can have 3 feet of soil underneath that. So everything is kept up near the surface. That 3-foot maximum depth kind of gets people's eyes opening up a little bit when we're in person and I can actually see all of y'all, because it's wintertime. It gets down 30 below and we're applying basically water into dirt when the frost gets down 6-7 feet, depending on where you're at. Septic fields, septic mounds, all that, as long as we're not trying to start the system when the ground's frozen, they stay warm enough that they don't freeze off if they're designed, maintained, built properly. Okay, we get enough bacterial action going on inside there, you'll still get your snow cover, but you don't get the frost going down there and affecting any of our treatment. So designs are important in order to be able to keep things going. Now that trench depth, the maximum depth is 3 feet. There's nothing stopping people from going a little bit shallower, depending on if there's a restrictive condition in that soil that makes you want to have to do that. So here's an example. Now this is not a great example because it's not 100% reflective, but we got a house here. Here's our piping coming from the house, 2-compartment septic tank. You can see there's no risers or anything on it. I mean, if this was installed like this, we're going to expect insulation. This one is gravity, so it's going from this tank into a bell and siphon, or it could be pumping, I suppose, but it's kind of close to that. It's going into a distribution box, and then this distribution box is having equal doses going this way, and it's going into these chambers. Now, what I don't like about this picture is you have a look at that, it looks like, oh, wow, septic systems aren't big at all. They can be really tiny. That is definitely not the case. Septic systems, it's very rare that you only have 2 laterals. Here's a lateral, here's a lateral. You can have quite a few more. It all depends on the soils that you're applying everything into, and they're definitely not that short. But it gives an idea of what we're looking at. So when you have chambers put in like this, then there's geotextile fabric that goes over top of it. And this gets backfilled, and then you can seed it to grass over top. If it's built properly, you're not going to be able to see where it's at, other than you're going to have an inspection port here, and another inspection port here on every single lateral. Another option is pipe and rock. So this is the same type of trench. This trench would have been dug up this way and this way during construction. They're putting washed gravel down. We can't just use pit run. It has to be a washed gravel. And then the piping is put inside there. That's a perforated piping, so all the effluent is going into that piping. And then we put a little bit more rock over top of it. We have a geotextile fabric, and then we backfill that. The reason for the geotextile fabric for this one and for this is we don't want any of the silts and clays to work their way down through there, because if you get a bunch of silt and clay down at the bottom here or the bottom here, what it does is it actually will stop the effluent from going down. So then the effluent has to go sideways and it works its way up. And when we do plug this off completely, it has no place to go but up. And then that's when you start having a swamp in your backyard or front yard, depending where you're putting it. So here's an example, a picture of a septic mound. So a septic field is built, trenches going into the ground. But if you've got a shallow water table, say your water table is at 3 feet, you can't put a septic field in there, period, not even with secondary treated effluent. But you can do a septic mound. So a septic mound is built right on top of the soil. This kind of beige area here, this is a washed concrete sand. That is the absolute most important portion of a septic mound to get right. Okay. Sizing has to be right. All the things have to be right. But this sand, that's what's going to make or break you. That washed concrete sand is very expensive. But if we have too much silt, too much clay in there, they're going to do what I said would happen in the septic field. They're going to filter down. They're going to plug off the soil all underneath this mound. And then the sewage effluent is going to start coming out the edge of the mound, called the toe. It's going to start breaking out there, and then you are having to replace your septic mound. Septic mounds, depending on the area, are anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 to get installed in the first place. If you put it in and you don't use the right sand, you might be putting a new one in 1 year down the road when that thing fails. So it's really important to get that right. Over top of the sand, it's optional. You can put gravel on there if you want. You can have pipe inside the gravel here, or you can have chambers over top, kind of like what you had in that septic field, those black chambers. Geotextile fabric. Then we got sandy loam or loamy sand goes over top of all that to support a grass cover. Septic mounds, we typically see them as long and skinny. However, they can be a little bit wider. Used to be a time where it was thought that if you went 10 feet wide, 60 feet long, that would handle any 3 or 4 bedroom house. That's definitely not the case. It's the soil underneath the mound that decides how wide it can be and, quite frankly, how big it can be. The thing to keep in mind with a septic mound is these sides taper out. They are a 3-to-1 slope because you can ride your little ride-on lawnmower over top of it to keep the grass cleared. Definitely don't drag the big brush mower behind your Massey Ferguson going over top of that mound, because you are going to do a lot of damage to it and likely destroy it. And when you spend that much money to fix these things or build them, you don't want to have to replace it for something silly. So here's a view of the inside of a mound. This was done during a mound install day. So when AOMA is doing training, they have installation days. So we have mound install days and field install days and at-grade install days. There's soils days out in the field where the contractors are able to come together and learn what they're looking at when they're actually looking at the soil. Because we can teach them a lot in the course, but until you actually get into the soil, you get into the test pits and start having a look, it doesn't always click. Once we can get the contractors out there, then they get things figured out fairly quickly. So what we see here is we've got chambers. These chambers are just placed to the side. That's not where they're going to end up going. They'll end up going over top of the pipe here and then here as well. So you can see we've got piping coming up out of the ground to a T, and then we've got a lateral going this way. We have a lateral going this way. We have another T underground, T coming up, and a lateral and a lateral. Okay. These are 4 inches minimum up above our sand layer. Now this sand layer has some gravel added on top of it, but again, you don't need to anymore. Used to have to, but science got involved again and said we didn't really necessarily need it. The main thing to keep in mind is, as a safety codes officer, when I come out to do the inspection, this is the stage that I want to see this thing at. Reason being is I want to be able to see the pipings put in properly. I want to see that it's placed where it's supposed to be placed. If I can get my hands on some of that sand, I'm going to grab a handful of sand, dump that into a water bottle and shake it up while I'm doing my inspection, because I'm going to have a look at that sand afterwards and make sure that it is actually washed concrete sand. If I shake it up in a water bottle, I let it sit, I do my inspection, I come back, I still can't see daylight through it. That's not washed concrete sand. Okay, we'll have a little bit of sand, silt, a little bit of clay that might be in that bottle. That should be about it. And then I also want to see the squirt test. So you see we've got water squirting up here and here, basically all the way along. You can see we're about this high. This squirt height we need to have at minimum of 5 feet high, because what it does is when these chambers are in place, it actually hits the top of the chamber and rains down over top of everywhere. That way it's actually utilizing the entire width of that sand. And we want to make sure that it's even. I don't want to see 7 feet here and then see 2 feet down the other side, because that means this side's getting the majority of the effluent, this side's getting very little, and this mound will fail over on this side because we're overloading one side. Everything needs to be kept even, and they can install valves here and here, and in various different locations, kind of tinker with it a little bit. But if you do the design work right off the get-go, there's no need to have to throttle it and have the extra valves in place. So this is where I want to see a septic mound during the install. Unfortunately, in most areas, you might only see a safety codes officer 1 or 2 days a week. And when it's install season, these things are going in 7 days a week. So when we've got contractors that we have very few deficiencies with, we'll typically allow them to continue, but we have them take pictures and send the pictures in. The SEO can have a look at the picture, say, yeah, you know what, that looks like you're doing everything right. Continue. And then we still have to come out to site. You'll still have an SEO out on site at some point just to verify that everything was actually built the way it was supposed to be built. Make sure that it's where it's supposed to be. Make sure that the tank has its alarm in place. It has its filter in place. That the mound has got that nice 3-to-1 slope on it, and so forth. Another option that we've got that I had mentioned earlier is a LFH at grade. So what this is underneath here, we've got piping 4 inches above the forced floor, whether it's hung from the inside of the chambers or it's got pipe stands underneath. Either way, it's 4 inches above the forest floor, and we just follow through in the forest, and we follow the slope. We don't go down slope, we don't go up slope. We follow the slope all the way around, and we snake in through the trees. So you see, we're not cutting trees out. We got trees here and here and here, and all over here and that sort of thing. We have to have a proper LFH layer. So that's basically your leaf litter. That's an established forest where you're actually able to scrape the forest floor, and towards the top you can kind of identify that, hey, that's a leaf. A little bit deeper down, it looks like it might have been a leaf at one point. A bit deeper, it's pretty much soil at that point, just from everything rotting over the years. So we have to have at least 2 inches of an LFH layer. We have to have the forested area. We put the pipe down, we have the chambers over top of it, and then we've got bark mulch over top of all that. Now we can't just use small we can't use small sawdust and things like that. It's got to be a bark mulch that goes over top of it, and we have to be able to actually look at it and see that there's some grain and whatnot in there, because if you use too small pieces, you're going to get a lot of compaction. So if it was just plain sawdust, if you've seen sawdust when it gets wet, it's just, it might as well be cardboard, or even stronger than that. It doesn't allow a lot of oxygen to get through. Proper bark mulch does. Now, what's good about the at grade is, with a septic field or a septic mound, you have to have an area that doesn't have the trees. You can't have trees growing inside your mound right up against it. You can't build a mound in the trees with trees in the middle. Septic fields, you can't have any trees in there either, because what will happen is your tree roots will come in and they'll actually block all the pores on that piping, and it'll destroy your system. Whereas in that grade, we're actually suspended above that forest floor, so the roots aren't able to come up and get into the orifices that are drilled into that pipe. So I like at grades because when you install it into the forest floor like this, the forest overtakes it again. And it doesn't matter if trees are in the middle, if trees are growing around it, because the roots can't get into there. And over the years, you kind of lose track of where this is at. I don't see a lot of at grades failing. Now, one thing that you do need to have with an at grade is you need to have a packaged sewage treatment plant. You can't just have a septic tank and go to the at grade. You have to have that packaged treatment plant. Whereas with septic field, septic mound, or an open discharge, you can have a septic tank feeding either one of those. Now, if you're putting thing that I'd recommend doing, the code, but throw it over top of bark mulch, because we're putting these in, and if you're starting to get a bunch of deer, moose, and whatnot that are walking over top of that, they can do some damage to it. And if we throw some deadfall over top of that, they're more likely to either hop over it or walk around it, and a lot less chance of them doing any sort of damage to it for us. So that's an overview of the types of systems that we have. We do have, of course, the open discharges. We don't touch on that because it's a really basic thing, but an open discharge, it comes out of your septic tank, goes out to a prescribed distance, comes up to the surface, and basically you're just spraying the effluent out from there. With an open discharge, you have to have a minimum of 10 acres. Newer systems, you need to have 300 feet to every property line, and a bunch of other distances that you have to have. Open discharges still have their place, but they smell really bad, and that's why we've got the 300-foot rule. When you're subdividing a quarter section, you can only have a maximum of 5 open discharges on there, and at some point, if a few very vocal people get their way, maybe open discharges will disappear, but for now, they are still in the code. So we still got some time yet. So regulations. So regulations is basically where I live when I have my safety codes officer hat on. So this is all the laws and whatnot that are involved in septic systems. So the regulations, we have the Alberta Private Sewage System Standard of Practice. This says 2015 in the handbook. I have to update that because now we have the 2021 version. The 2021 version is better because the handbook is actually in the standard of practice as well. And you can view that document online. All you have to do is type into Google Alberta Private Sewage System Standard Practice 2021, and you can look at that anytime you want to be able to see what the rules and best practices are for building these things. Then we got the Alberta Private Sewage Regulations. So the standard of practice is the code book. The private sewage regulation is what says that the standard of practice is the code book. And it's got a few other things on there, but we don't need to get into all that. Then we got the Alberta Permit Regulation. The Alberta Permit Regulation says before you do this, you need to have a permit. So as far as a septic system is concerned, before we install the septic system, you have to have a permit. So we'll get into a little bit of what it takes to get a permit, but the permit regulation is what sets that. And then we've got the safety code.
Rick?
Yep.
Sorry,
Yep.
There's a chat question that I missed. I just saw. Jennifer's asking, how is depth affected by soil type? Example, very rocky soil.
So the soil type doesn't affect depth. It's going to affect length and width. So if you've got a really rocky soil, depending on what the other portions of the soil are, if you've got a sandy soil and then you've got a lot of rock into it, you're going to be looking at a really big system because we're going to have to spread the effluent out that much more. It doesn't affect our depth. So what we have is we've got the maximum depths, 3 or 5 feet, depending if it's primary, secondary treated effluent that's coming out of there. And then we have to spread that out over more area if we can apply less effluent. But we'll get into a little bit of that as well. Hopefully
and then there's one more question from Jennifer. What kind of weight can they handle? So I'm guessing that's when we were talking about the septic tanks and the mounds and stuff. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, for mounds, she said.
Okay, sorry, you broke up a little bit there, Sherry. What kind of what?
Oh, what kind of weight can a mound handle?
Oh, okay. Reasonable. I haven't seen anything that says a mound is going to be able to handle this much weight. If we're looking at small lawn equipment with turf tires on there, nobody's ever done any damage with that. But if we start looking at the larger equipment, the larger, ride-on tractors and stuff like that, it's probably a bad idea to drive those over top of it. I can't say that you're going to be able to handle so much PSI of weight over the top of these things because nobody's done that level of research on it to say that this is what they're able to do, because there's a lot of variables in it. Exactly what type of soil that you've got, the thickness and that sort of thing. So it's the lighter the better. I mean, preferable it'd be mow it by hand. But if you've got a small ride-on lawnmower, that would be perfectly fine. It's just the larger equipment that we're really cognizant of because we don't want to take that chance. If you start doing a bunch of compaction on your septic system with that equipment, it's going to get expensive for you if you are doing some damage. All right, carrying on. So we got the permit regulation, and covering over top of all that is the Safety Codes Act. So Safety Codes Act is a fairly substantial piece of law. It says what everybody's role in the permitting world is. It says what the municipalities need to do. It says what the Safety Codes Council has to do. It says what the Safety Codes officers have to do, what we can't do. It touches on who has powers to do what and under what authority. It also allows for the issuance of orders and variances and penalties and all the other sort of things that go along with pretty much any other law. So all of that stuff is me and other safety codes officers such as myself. Then we got the Alberta Public Health Act. That's another set of laws that would govern this. Alberta Public Health Act is going to come into place if you're impacting other people. So if you've got, say, a rental property and you have a failed septic system on there, you could expect that you might see a safety codes officer, but you can also see a public health officer. And we've got different rules, different regulations that we follow, and different tools at our disposal to compel correction of the system. And then if you are disposing of your sewage into a water body, then we could also expect to see Alberta Environment coming out to say hello. So the regulations set quite a few different things. So a lot of stuff in the standard of practice. Minimum tank sizes. We have septic tanks based on the number of bedrooms that you've got, but we also have to take into account if you've got any high volume fixtures in there, if you've got any big jacuzzi tubs, if you're doing a bunch of wine making, dog wash, any of that sort of stuff, the standard practice says this is how big your septic tank has to be. Now, standard practice is all minimums. You can size things bigger, but you can't size them smaller. Okay? It gives us minimum horizontal setbacks from site constraints. Setback distances. So I was saying earlier how with an open discharge, we need to be 300 feet from any property line. That's a horizontal setback. And we've got set distances from other types of systems, like the toe of a septic mound, we're looking at 10 feet to a property line. Septic field, we have to be away from the property line. A holding tank, we can be as close as 3 1/4 feet to a property line. It's all in the standard practice, tells us what we're able to do as far as that's concerned. It gives us the minimum vertical separations from any restricting soils or a water table. So I was saying during that slide where we saw the evaporation, we saw the water going down, that sort of thing, said how we need to have 5 feet of soil if it's primary treated effluent, or 3 feet if it's secondary treated effluent. That's coming out of the standard practice. That's our minimum vertical separations. Now, when we look at these separations, the horizontal and the vertical, they're quite different, not just because we're talking the big distances, but with a horizontal setback, we can play around with that a little bit. So with an open discharge, you have to have that 300 feet. So basically your lot has to be at least 300 feet either direction, north, south, east, west. But if you've got a slightly smaller lot, say you can't quite make it by 30, 40 feet, we do have the variance process where we could consider doing an open discharge on it. Maybe, it's not a guarantee ever. Okay, but we could consider doing a variance for a horizontal setback if the ground's sloping back towards your property. And, if in the opinion of the safety codes officer, it makes sense. What we don't issue variances for is the vertical separation. We just plain can't. We can't allow the effluent to be dispersed closer to a water table or closer to restricting soil, like a really heavy clay or bedrock or anything like that, because it's going to cause quite a bit of damage. And then it also, the standard practice sets out the allowable soil loading rates. So every type of soil has its own loading rate. It says you're allowed to put this much sewage effluent onto a square foot of soil. So I'll just hold that up a little bit. You can see there's a lot of data in there. Okay. So we have a look at it. We can see that a medium sandy loam, which is granular and it's kind of tough, it's like a grade 2, we can put 0.6 gallons per day per square foot. But if we have, say, a silty clay loam, granular, grade 2, we can only put 0.27. So we can put half as much sewage effluent per square foot per day onto that soil. So the soils are really important in order to size this, because if we can only put half as much on this type of soil than we put on that, if we use the wrong parameters, we can undersize our system immensely where it's going to fail right away. Or on the flip side, you can end up building a system twice as big as what it has to be. So we really have to know what the soils are, apply the proper soil loading rate, and then we can build our system. So the standard practice also says that when we've got sandy soils and we have a lot of coarse fragments, so a lot of rock, a lot of gravel, we start making our systems a lot bigger because we can put a lot less sewage effluent on there. A lot of the rocky soils, we can only put 0.2 gallons per square foot per day. So 0.6, 0.27, now we're dropped down to 0.2. When we start getting down below 0.2, you're not putting a septic field in at all. You might be looking at putting in a septic mound or just playing a holding tank if you're building an old gravel mine, for instance, gravel pit. So if you got a lot of gravels, it's definitely going to make your system bigger if you can put anything in at all.
Hey, Rick.
Yep,
there's a question in the chat box.
Yep.
Jennifer says, is there anything in the regulations that should be added into local LUB for developmental space? Based on the requirements for septic, i.e. MGA says 1 acre minimum should be increased to accommodate these systems.
So when it comes to the MGA and the land use bylaws, that's all up to the municipalities to govern that. They set all of those parameters, and then you're building your septic systems to fit that. So if we're starting to look at, say, a 1 acre lot, you can still put septic system onto there. It's going to be really tight to do anything on it. You might end up with just a holding tank. Another problem that you've got is with the really small lots, we're getting to the point now with the new standard practice where those are going to be declared to be complex systems. And when it's a complex system, you're going to have to get an engineer or somebody else that's acceptable to the administrator to do that design, because it's going to be a one-shot thing. If you're putting in a septic mound, if you can fit a septic field on there, it's going to be going into the only spot on that site that you'll have that you can actually use for it. So because it's a lot higher risk, we have a lot higher expectations for that design. Land use bylaws typically say that systems need to be able to meet what the standard practice and other regulations require as well. So we won't see the standard practice dovetail into the land use bylaws, but the land use bylaws will typically point back to the standard practice as well. So we talked about septic systems. What is it? What does it do? We talked a little bit about the regulations. Now we'll talk a little bit about the design and installation of septic systems. Now, again, I'm not going to make you competent designers, but it'll give you an idea of how much work goes into a septic design, why it's important, and if you're hiring a contractor to come out there and do the work, the expectations you should have for what they should be doing.
Hey, Rick, sorry to interrupt one more time. There's one more question in relation to one you just answered. Jennifer wants to know, what is your minimum suggested size for subdivisions for individuals, example, acreage developments?
I really don't have an opinion on minimum size for the developments, because if a system is dealt with properly, if it's properly designed and whatnot, it's going to work. It's going to do its job. Realistically, depending on the soils, I'd like to have probably close to around 3 acres just to be able to give a second treatment area. But I mean, you can build them smaller if you'd like to. It's just the smaller lots that you get, the less space that you've got to do the soil treatment. And if you get really, really tight developments where you've got a lot of places on a lot of really small lots, you're definitely going to have to do a lot of work at the beginning, whoever's doing the development of that land, just to make sure that septic systems will actually work on there. Because if you get to really small lots, but the soils require a really large treatment system, you're going to be looking at maybe putting in sewage treatment plants to allow a slightly smaller septic treatment, or everybody's going to be stuck having holding tanks. Now, the problem with holding tanks is some municipalities are insisting that if a septic system can be installed, it shall be installed, because everything coming from your holding tanks is getting hauled to a lagoon. And the municipalities, they don't always want to build a bunch of new lagoons to be able to satisfy all the subdivisions and that sort of thing, and their lagoon space starts to get tight. When that starts happening, that's when you start seeing the bylaws that say you're not going to do this if. So yeah, my opinion, I mean, the bigger the property, the better, just so that you have some space. That way, if there is a problem, you have another spot where you can put a septic system in. Because septic systems, I haven't seen one that's able to be remediated yet. So if you do a one and done and it fails, you're going to be stuck having a holding tank for the remainder of the time that that house is there. And at that point, you've got a holding tank that's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,200 gallons, give or take, depending on the septic tank size, where you might be getting that thing sucked out, once a week, once every second week, that sort of thing. So it starts to get really expensive really quick. So design and installation. Who can provide these services? Well, trained and certified installers holding a current certificate of competency from Alberta Municipal Affairs, which is formerly known as PSDS ticket, they can definitely do the design and installation services for you. These are contractors that are trained and they are tested, and then they are certified by the province to say, yes, I am a private sewage installer, I'm a private sewage designer, we're good to go. Now, there's some contractors out there that they just do designs, some that do just the installs, a lot of them do both. At some point in the near future, we're going to have it where it's going to be, you have a designer, you have an installer, and you have to have a certified design for every install. They're going to separate the designations a little bit. It's not going to stop contractors from doing both, but it's going to separate it up a little bit. So that's one option. The other option is if it's a single family dwelling that you intend to reside in on your own, you can, as a homeowner, do your own design, do your own installation, get your own permit, and that sort of thing. Now, keep in mind, it's very difficult to fill out a private sewage application correctly, especially the first time, because most people don't have any sort of background in that, and trying to understand just what the forms are asking can be quite difficult. That's not to stop a homeowner from trying. Safety codes officers will work with you as much as we're able to, but we can only give you so much advice without getting down the slippery slope of the safety codes officer doing the design. Some homeowners will hire a contractor or hire a designer to do the design. They do the work themselves, but that's all up to you. What you need to keep in mind is, as the owner of the property, you have the ultimate responsibility to make sure that everything that happens on that site is done to code. And if you hire an installer to do the work for you, have the installer pull the permit. As a homeowner, you can pull the permit yourself, but the installers, if they are certified, they're more than capable of getting those permits. And some areas will actually charge more for a homeowner's permit than they do for a contractor's permit. So if a contractor's saying, oh, you get the permit, it'll cost less, that doesn't always reflect all areas. So what do we have to do for design and installation? First and foremost, we do a detailed site and soil evaluation. So somebody's got to go out there and start doing some digging. Now, if it's an open discharge, you're going to dig one test pit. It's going to be a minimum of 6 feet deep, and you have to identify all the different layers that are in the soil for that. If it's a septic field, primary treated effluent, and you're going to go 3 feet deep, you're going to need to dig a test pit 9 feet deep. If it's going to be a sewage treatment mound, then we're digging a hole 4 feet deep. So what we're doing is we're identifying all the soils in the treatment area, plus a foot below that. because we need to know, do we have signs of a high water table in there? Do we have a restricting condition? Do we have bedrock coming across? Do we have a seam of coal? Do we have loam and then a whole bunch of sand with a lot of rock in it before we get down to clay? Whatever the case might be. We need to be able to identify that, because once we identify where the septic system is going to go and what the soils are like, then we can start getting into the design. So when we're looking at that test pit, a book a lot of people are going to use is this book here. This is the field book for describing and sampling soils, and it gives us a lot of information on how to describe the soil. So when we're looking at portions of soil, like if you break a chunk of soil out, that's called a ped. And with a ped, for dry, we want to be able to identify how hard this piece of soil is. So this book gives us the options. It can be loose, soft, slightly hard, moderately hard, hard, very hard, extremely hard, rigid, or very rigid. Okay, like seriously, it goes that much detail. Okay. This book goes on to describe how the soil is put together. Is it blocky, subangular blocky, granular, prismatic, platy? That's all different ways that the soil looks, how these peds look. So blocky, just like it sounds, right? Looks like a block. Subangular blocky is kind of rounded. Platy looks like a bunch of steel plates kind of haphazardly thrown on top of each other. Granular looks like sugar. Okay. Columnar soils look like little columns with kind of rounded tops on it. Prismatic looks like prisms. Okay. It helps describe what all that's about. We need to identify the different colors in the soils. Every contractor in the province is expected to have this book, the Munsell Soil Color Chart. And you can see here, it's got a bunch of different colors. Okay. There's a lot of pages to it. And basically what happens is when you're identifying the soil, you have to flip through to the page that has the color you're looking for. And then you drop a little bit of soil onto the page, and then you're able to identify that, say, this one right here is off the 7.5 YR chart, and it is a 5/2 chroma. So myself, as a safety codes officer, I get that information. I'm able to have a look at the color of soil that you've got, because it actually makes a difference. Because then we're looking at stuff like models. Now, models, you can think of like blotchy, rusty areas in the soil. That's because of water coming up into that soil and washing the oxides out, making things rust up a little bit. And what we're looking for is the chroma change. How much difference is that color from the background color of the soil? Because that's going to tell us, are we looking at a water table or not? We're looking for stuff like glaying or glying, however you want to pronounce it. That is kind of the washed out areas in the soil. It looks kind of gray colored. Might have grays, greens, blues, color somewhat like that. That's from the water coming up often enough. It's actually washing the colors out of the soil. That tells us that we've got a water table. So we need to know about that in the soil. There's another book that we use, Soils Illustrated. This is by Dr. Kent Watson. Brilliant guy. Love Dr. Kent. He's always interesting to talk to, but I'm a little bit of a dirt nerd. But it tells everything about soils. Like this is what he's talking about for structure of the soil. So he's helping identify, is it a granular? What's the sizing of it? That sort of information. This is all stuff that we need to know. These 3 books, that's just to fill out the soil profile log form correctly. And that's just one form that we've got in the design. So let's say for an open discharge, you're going to have a permit application page. You're going to have a summary design report. You're going to have a site diagram showing where everything is on the site, distances to property lines, buildings, water, water wells, lakes, rivers, streams, all that sort of stuff. You're going to have a tank certificate, a B66 certificate to say that the tank that you're putting in is actually approved. You're going to have pump information. You're going to have high-level alarm information, and you're going to have at least one soil profile log form and one lab result of the most limiting layer in that soil. So when you're looking at the soil profile log form, you're in the test pit, you're looking at the soil, and where does the soil change? So 0 to 10 inches might be topsoil. 10 inches to 32 inches might be blocky, granular, 2 clay. Then you might have some loam, whatever the case might be. Every test pit is completely different. You're having to identify all those layers. Then you take a sample from the most limiting layer in the wall of that test pit, large Ziploc freezer bag full, and you send that off to a testing lab so they can tell you what kind of soil you have. Of course, sandy loam, clay, heavy clay, sand, silty clay loam, whatever the case might be. Okay? If you as a homeowner in your test pit, you're looking at that going, well, I don't know which layer is the most limiting layer. I don't know, what type of soil I'm even looking at. Get a sample from each different layer and send that off to a lab for testing. Don't just dig with a spade out in the soil and throw it into a bag and send it off to a lab, because your results are not going to be consistent with what you actually have on that site. You might end up building a system way too big, or a system that's way too small and fails on you right away. Also, don't just dig down 9 feet and then take a scoop of soil from the bottom of that pit and send that in, because that's just a mixture of all the soils that you've been digging through, and it's not going to reflect what you've actually got there. So definitely be really, really aware of what you're doing. And the standard of practice, it lays out how much effluent you're able to put in, but it also says how the sizing of the fields, the mounds have to be, how to do all the design work. So there's quite a bit to it. A holding tank, you might get away with sending me 5 pieces of paper. If you do a mound or an at grade, I see applications coming in 40 or 50 pieces of paper. So it can be really, really involved. If I never get the information I need from you to install the system, you're never going to get permission to install the system. Keep in mind that you need to have the design approved. So all the design work gets done after you've identified the soils. It gets sent into a safety codes officer. The safety codes officer has a look at it. If we need more information, we ask you for it. We'll give you some time. We'll give you a month typically to give us that information. If we never see it, we have to refuse your application. Do not do an install, or do not let an install happen on your property until you have a permit in hand or your contractor can show the permit. It happens far too often where people will apply for a permit after the fact, or they apply for the permit as they're doing the installation. And then I'm the unlucky individual that has to say, no, this system is not going to work. The design is faulty. It is way undersized. And if you've already installed it, you've just destroyed that spot. Septic field, you might be able to make it bigger. Septic mound, not typically. You might be building a second mound or second septic field. So until the design comes back approved, do not do any installation. You're not just taking a chance, but you're also in contravention of the Safety Codes Act. Step 4, licensed contractor installs a system, or as a homeowner, you can install the system. Step 5, Safety Codes Officer is going to inspect the system. Now, if we accept pictures to allow construction to continue, an SCO still has to come out to site. If an SCO never comes out to site, never does an actual inspection, they've definitely not done their job. They haven't done their due diligence. They haven't done what the permit pays them to do, and definitely make a phone call. If it's one of my SCOs, he won't be one of my SCOs any longer. And then step 6, the homeowner takes the system over. So once the contractor has left the building, everything's in your hands. So you take the system over. You're in charge of maintaining that system, looking after it, making sure that you're not putting anything in there that you're not supposed to be putting in. You're responsible for any problems that might be there. So like any other work that's being done on your behalf, whether it's private sewage or electrical work or plumbing work or whatever, always have a holdback. Always negotiate that at the beginning so there's no big surprises at the end. But negotiate a holdback. Most people go for 15-20%. That way, if at the end I come on, I do my inspection, say, oh, almost the contractor needs to come back and install some erosion control or install the alarm or what have you, you've got that holdback, which will compel the contractor to come and get that done so that he can get the rest of his money. He or she, of course. most contractors in this province, especially the ones that are members of the association, most will come back no matter what. Whether they've gotten paid 100% or not, because their reputation is important to them. But every now and then you get a contract.
Battery 90%. Connected to Samsung Galaxy S7.
Yourself. It's just
Two.
With any work that you're getting done, always have a hold back until you get final approval. So then we've gotten through all that. Now we're just if it just goes into the soil and doesn't go anywhere, it creates a swamp, right? It's going to go someplace. It's going to work its way out somewhere. So we need to make sure that we. Yep.
You're just kind of breaking up, and I missed some stuff. So maybe could you just start that little bit again, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Let's check my connection here. My connection looks good. Okay, so movement of water and soil. So water that infiltrates in the soil will eventually make its way to either groundwater, surface water body, or it can go into both. It has to go someplace, because if we're just dumping the effluent into the ground, it's just going to create a giant mud pie if the effluent doesn't work its way down. We're going to make a swamp. You're going to start having a bunch of cattails and all that sort of stuff that's going to start forming in there. So if we don't design our systems properly, if we overload an area, that's a really high probability of what we're going to be able to do. And if we've got saturated ground, the oxygen's not able to get in there. So the aerobic bacteria dies off. Now we've got an untreated sewage swamp. Treatment effluent to occur in the soil, it must travel through a required distance in an unsaturated flow condition. So it's got to go through the soil. If it doesn't go through the soil, we're going to have all kinds of problems. All right. So using the septic system. So if you have no intention whatsoever of building a system anytime soon, you don't care about, everything else, then this is the portion that you're here for. This is how do you use your septic system, because, it's not part of the curriculum in school or anything like that. When we have sewage systems on our properties, we're not like the city where you can just dump whatever and flush it and forget. Okay. Even the cities, you shouldn't be just flush and forget, because the things that you're flushing that you shouldn't be flushing, somebody has to deal with that at some point. Large municipalities like Edmonton, Calgary, Drayton Valley, all these places with their sewage treatment plants, everything that gets flushed that we're going to talk about that you don't flush, somebody has to clean their filters off. Somebody has to clean their screens off. Somebody has to pull these things out of their pumps if it gets passed that way. Somebody's dealing with it at some point. With private sewage, the person dealing with it is you or your pumper, right? Your system fails because everything's plugged off because of things you shouldn't have been flushing. Somebody's got to fix that, because otherwise you can't use it. So using your septic system, startup and normal use. Additives, starters, and feeders are not required. Okay, there's old wives' tale, old way of doing things where you had a brand new septic system, you grab a dead chicken, you throw that in the tank because there's going to be bacteria, and that's supposed to start your system. Nope, you don't need to do that. That's just silliness. Science has caught up, obviously, over the last few hundred years, because keep in mind, septic systems, septic tanks in particular, they've been in use since the Roman times, so it's not new technology. But the way that we understand them is definitely getting better. Additives and starters and feeders, there's a lot of different products that you can buy out there, and you can get mystery bags or tubs full of stuff, and they might call it like Septobac or Miracle Sap or whatever name you want to throw onto it. It's some mystery bacteria in a container that somebody's saying, yeah, dump this in your system. This is how you want to start your system, or they tell you, oh, dump this down your toilet once a month, that sort of thing. I'm here to tell you, you don't need them, and I haven't seen any proof yet that they actually work. The bacteria that's coming out of your belly and going into that tank, that is what's doing the job. Okay, our bacteria flourishes in that environment, and it allows for everything to be broken down. And with the bacteria that's in our stomach is helping break things down in order for us to take in the nutrients. Everything else goes beyond, but that bacteria is still doing its job. we start introducing a bunch of weird bacteria into there, it's definitely not going to help. It might actually hinder your system a little bit. So don't throw stuff in there that you don't need. Septic safe cleaners. There's lots of different cleaners out there that say that they're, safe for septic systems and stuff like that. And most of them are. Definitely use stuff like that. Anything in moderation. It says bleach and harsh cleaners in moderation. Absolutely. No chemical drain cleaners, no solvents, no flammables. You don't want to have like the 2000 flushes, blue, weird looking water tablets and stuff like that on the go. Yes, they keep your porcelain looking cleaner, except all the antibacterial properties that they've got will actually do damage to the bacteria in your tank. And then you might find that your scum and your sludge layers will actually form thicker, and you might have to pump your tank out more often. The bleach and the harsh cleaners, stuff like that, a little bit, I'm not saying keep your house dirty or anything like that, but if you're a complete germaphobe and everything has to be, spick and span, and it has to smell lemony fresh every second of every day, country life might not be all that great for you, because if we put too much cleaner down into that septic system, you're going to be sucking that tank out a lot more often. Water conservation is important, but it's not critical on a septic system. Septic systems are a great water recycler. Using too little can result in a higher strength wastewater, and too much can overload the system. When you think about a septic system, now I'm going to go with a traditional idea. We have a well on site. We're pulling the water up out of the ground. We're utilizing it in the house. We are putting it through a septic system. It's going out to our field. It's going back down to the soil, back to the water table. We're recycling. Now, we do lose, say 5% to evaporation going up. When we have our coffee and we leave, we're taking that much away with us. But when we come back from work or a trip at the end of the day, we're typically bringing a full bladder back with us. So we're transferring it back and forth that way. So if we've got a properly designed, maintained system, we're just recycling that water. We got very little loss, but then we get rain as well, which helps to replenish all that. So water conservation is not as important. If your faucet's always running, toilet's always mystery flush and stuff like that, definitely fix that, because we don't want to have too much water going out to your system. Now, using too little water does result in a higher strength wastewater. So I've had it many times in the past where people will come up and say, okay, we're supposed to have a septic field this big, but we're putting low flow toilets, low flow shower heads, low flow this, low flow that. We're going to really watch how much water we're using. So we think we should be able to put a smaller system in. Unfortunately, that's not true, because now what we've got is we've got less water. So our sewage strength is higher. It takes that much more time for it to be treated. So we don't have any trade-offs that way. So the really low flow fixtures, they don't really have a place out on the rural properties that use a well and a septic system. Some of the older houses, older systems, if you put a low flush toilet on there all of a sudden, you might find that you have a lot of problems with blockages because you just don't have enough water to keep moving that waste. Now, where water conservation is a bit more important is if you've got a cistern where you're hauling water in. Well, now you're paying for every drop of water that you're hauling in. So you want to definitely watch how much water you're using there. But again, no trade-offs for low flow fixtures. As well as if you've got a holding tank, then you definitely want to try to use low flow wherever you can, because you are paying to have your sewage hauled away every single time that thing gets filled up. So keep that in mind. And on the subject of holding tanks, the minimum size of a holding tank for a single family dwelling is 1,000 gallons. But a septic hauler might be hauling anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 gallons in his truck. And most of them charge by the trip, not by the gallon. So if you're going to have a guy coming out that can haul 5,000 gallons, put a 5,000 gallon tank in, because it might make the difference between getting it sucked out once a month for $250 to once every 4 or 5 months for the same price. And it's just something to keep in mind. You pay a little bit extra for the larger tank up front, but you're definitely going to save money as you go forward. Discharge backwash from water softeners, high efficiency furnaces, iron filters, reverse osmosis units, etc. should be diverted away from the septic system. Yeah, that's a lot of cold, cleanish water that's getting pushed through into your septic system. Your water softeners, you might have some salts that are coming through with that. Or your high efficiency furnaces are not as big of an issue as they were once thought to be. If it's 30 below, when that high efficiency furnace is running, you're probably going to create about a 5-gallon pail full of condensate each day. Now, you'll know you have a high efficiency furnace or water heater when you have plastic piping coming off, and it might be going through the roof, but it's probably going through the side of the house. And then you got a plastic drain line that comes from there that either goes to a condensate pump to pump it over to a drain someplace else, or it runs directly over and drops into your floor drain. Okay. Where high efficiency furnaces are a detriment to your septic system is if, say, it's a brand new septic system in a house that's still under construction, so you're not using, the toilets and whatnot yet, or if you're a snowbird and you're gone, and that's all the water that's going into your tank, that's where high efficiency furnaces could cause some problems, because that is a very acidic waste. So if it's not neutralized, it could actually eat away at the concrete septic tank if you've got a concrete tank. If that's the only water that's going into your septic tank all winter, then what's happening is that's clean, kind of semi-warm water that's going into there, but there's no bacterial load. The bacteria in your tank dies out, but your tank gets full, it pumps out. Now you're pumping clean, cool water out to your septic system. If it's an open discharge, you probably get away with it. If it's a septic field or a septic mound, you're going to freeze those right off. And if you freeze those off because you're just pushing clean water into there without any bacteria, it could be June or July before you're even able to use that system again. So just keep that in mind. We definitely prefer that everything gets run into another location, whether it gets pushed out to the surface or it goes into a dry well or a French drain, whatever the case might be. Definitely direct that away from your septic system. Go to the other side of the house if at all possible. Now, that's best case, okay? In reality, most of the time, you don't know that you've got hard water until your house is in use. You get it tested and go, I got to get a water softener. If you get a water softener and somebody ties that into your drain rather than doing, any of the other disposal, you can mitigate the damage it'll cause somewhat. The water softeners, when they come from the factory, they're set for the absolute hardest water that they'll be able to handle. But that might not be how hard your water is in the house. Your contractor, I'd like to say they would all test and adjust, but most don't. So as a homeowner, what you can do is get the instructions for your water softener, get a raw water sample, so water without going through the softener, see how hard that is, and actually dial in your water softener to the hardness of your water. So if you already got one in place right now, quick Google search, get a water sample tested for hardness, and adjust it, because maybe it doesn't need to backwash every night at 3 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it can backwash every 3 or 4 days and backwash less water. Each one's a little bit different. So definitely, mitigate it as much as you're able to. Practical tips. So when it comes to solid waste, we don't put plastic or inorganic items down. Flushable wipes, condoms, feminine hygiene products, paper towel, etc. Okay. Flushable wipes, they are flushable in that if you put it in your toilet and you push that lever, they will disappear. The problem with flushable wipes is they take forever to break down. So they go into your tank and they actually start breaking down a little bit, but they form part of your sludge and your scum layer. The microfibers start coming out of there and they'll actually work their way through your septic system. They will work their way through most filters, and then they'll start plugging off the pores in your septic system. So it'll plug off your septic fields, your septic mounds, and when it gets to a certain point, your system will fail because the effluent will not be able to travel down at the rate that it needs to. Condoms, that's the thing that the municipal guys are having to pull out of their screens all the time. If it goes into your septic system, you're pulling it out of your filter, or your septic hauler is going to be coming out there and doing that for you and telling you what I'm telling you, but probably a different look on his face. Feminine hygiene products, they have no place in septic systems at all. Private systems, absolutely. Public systems, yep, somebody's dealing with it. Okay, have that garbage can with the lid and everything else right next to it. Paper towel has no place going down into septic systems at all because it takes forever to break down. Now, right now, as homeowners, some of you might be going, oh, yeah, okay, yep, better not do that anymore. The flushable wipes, oh, septic approved. No, they're not. Plumber approved, absolutely, because plumbers make money digging those things out of your piping when they plug it all up. I come from a plumbing background, and I spent many hours sending augers down to retrieve these things for people. Okay, definitely don't do that. If you're going to have people over, maybe you want to have a little sign in there saying, please don't flush these. We're on a septic system. Or, you can go to Pinterest if that's your thing and get something really cute, a little poem or something that says that for you. Because if you have people that are just used to flush and forget, you're going to have to pay for their forgetfulness. Compost rather than a garburator. If you put a garburator onto your septic system, you have to make your septic tank a lot bigger, and you have to make your septic field or your septic mound a whole heck of a lot bigger. Carburetors have no place on a septic system because what they're doing is they're chewing everything up and they're spitting it out. That goes in your septic system, and now your septic system has to be able to treat all that. And because we're adding all that additional solids to it, it has to be bigger. If I come out there as a safety codes officer, I don't just do the septic, I do plumbing and gas as well. And some of us, myself included, also do the building inspections. If I come out and I'm doing the building final, or if I'm doing the plumbing final, and I see a garburator in there, the first thing I'm going to do is pull up your septic permit and see if the system was sized for it. If it hasn't been, I'm going to compel you to either change your entire septic system to be bigger, or I'm going to tell you to get rid of your garburator. So just don't install them at all. They're a complete waste. They cause more problems than they're good for. You can compost or just get rid of it. Try to keep grease, coffee grounds, animal fats, and other solid waste from going down the drains. Yeah, coffee grounds don't break down in your septic system. So if you're taking your filter and you're rinsing it out and just washing it down your sink every day, that is going to be going into your tank. That's going to be part of your sludge layer. And at some point, you're going to be paying a suck truck to remove all that for you. And of course, human waste and toilet paper are safe. When it comes to the toilet paper, you don't have to use the stuff that's approved for septic tanks or approved for RV use. Stuff that you can see through and that sort of stuff. You don't have to go to that stage, right? Because if you go too thin with the toilet paper, you're just going to be using more soap. The flip side of that is you shouldn't need anyways, the 5-layer pillowy soft Bear approved toilet papers, because those take a long time to break down in your tank. So find something, kind of happy medium for there, just keeping in mind that your septic system needs to be able to deal with that. And if it can't, you're paying for that suck truck. We don't pour paints, solvents, silicone products, or any construction waste down the drains. Okay, we never ever do that, even if it is a latex paint, because that paint will go all the way through the septic system until it gets to your field. It will, of course, not be treated in any manner, and it will plug off the pores and cause you problems in your septic field or your mound. If you are getting a new home built, have all your drains covered so nobody is dumping anything down there, because the trades just love to use that handy sink that's right there. Even if there is no water running to it, they'll use their own water, but they'll still wash everything out down your drains. So don't let them do that. Petrochemicals, fuels, oils, and that sort of thing definitely don't go into septic tanks. Not too often you hear about people draining the oil in their car and dumping it in their septic tank, figuring that's good. People do that in towns, unfortunately. Can't fix stupid. Garage drains, perimeter drains, diverted. So if you've got a floor drain in your garage and it runs to your septic system, if it's just a floor drain, it's probably going to be okay. But if you're washing your cars in there, definitely get rid of that water some other way. Take that over to a oil interceptor, whatever the case might be. Retain that, get that sucked out. If it's just snow melt water coming out, consider having that run out to a dry well, French drain, whatever the case might be, because all that cold extra water going in your septic system, it cools it off, makes it a little bit harder for it to work. Perimeter drains, think weeping tile. Your weeping tile does not drain into your septic system. Okay. First of all, that's clean, cool water going in your septic system that you're having to pump out, and it's going out to your septic system. It's affecting the bacterial action that you've got because it's cooling things off. It's diluting things a lot more. And if the sewer system was to back up, you'd actually get sewage going into the perimeter drains or into the weeping tile. And now you got sewage surrounding your house below grade up against the concrete. Not a good thing to have. So maintaining your septic system. Why do we want to maintain it? We definitely want to maintain it to save money, right? If you're not maintaining it and you have things that are being destroyed, your pump's gone, your filters are gone, your system itself is toast, it's going to be really expensive. Okay, we want to protect our property values and protect your health and the environment. If you go to sell your property and you've got a major sewage problem on there, and it gets identified, that's going to affect your sale. You might lose a lot of money on that if you really need to sell it. Safety first. Talking about septic tanks. Never, ever, 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 please go into your septic tank. Okay. We got a slide that shows why, but basically, if you go inside your septic tank and you're not doing it safely, it will kill you. Okay. To safely enter a septic tank, you either need to prove that you've got oxygen and the gases in the next slide are all gone, where it's safe and there's an environment that you can actually breathe in there, or you're going under supplied air breathing apparatus and you're going to be tied to a davit and you're going to have somebody ready to save your butt if something happens. Okay. People die in septic tanks. If you lay down on the surface and stick your head down into there, that can kill you. And a lot of times when one person dies in a septic tank, two people die in a septic tank because somebody goes in to get them, not realizing what it is that they're climbing into. I did this Septic Sense in southern Alberta a few years ago. And a few months after that, a little child died because they fell into a septic holding tank because the sewage hauler had removed the lid to suck the tank out, didn't put it back on properly. That child died. Okay, so never go in your tanks. Keep the tank lid secure. If you have that piece of plywood that I was talking about earlier and you don't have a proper septic lid, please get one. Okay, if it's a concrete lid, it's got to weigh at least 65 pounds. If it is fiberglass or plastic, you need to be able to mechanically fasten it, usually stainless steel screws, in order to screw that thing into place. We don't want anybody dying. We keep those lids secure. Electric shock and explosion could happen. Some of the gases that we've got in there will go bang. Electric shock, we don't want to have any sort of electrical connections inside that tank. So if you got junction boxes or anything, or outlets, keep them outside the tank. If you're one of those people that has a trouble light hanging inside your tank to keep it from getting cold, please remove the trouble light. Okay, add some insulation, because that trouble light, if it causes problems, it can go bang. Okay, keep flammables out of the system as much as we can, and avoid infectious diseases, because the stuff that goes inside septic tanks is what's coming out of our bodies, and it's not always there for us. So here's some examples. So when we're looking at the examples of what we've got in here, hydrogen sulfide, sour gas, H2S, if you're from out east in the mines, stink damp. Okay, it is explosive. It has an odor at low levels. It smells like rotten eggs. But if you get a higher level, it's not much to get there. You can't smell it anymore because it actually affects your nose. You won't smell that anymore. It is heavier than air, but if the air is being stirred up, it will actually bring that H2S up. So you can get H2S right above the septic tank if things are moving around. So if you're blowing air in, in order to be able to go do a tank entry and you're trying to get rid of all these gases, don't be standing downwind from it because that's coming for you. Methane, think natural gas. Natural gas that you put in your houses to burn, right, for heat. Methane is created by rot, and we got rot going on inside those septic tanks. Then you got carbon dioxide, oxygen. None of these things are supporting of human life. They are all inside your tank at various amounts. And we got deadly poison, asphyxiant, deadly poison, asphyxiant. They will kill you. Stay out of your tank. Part of your maintenance is inspection. You can do this as a homeowner if you're competent. It could be something as simple as walking around your septic system, walking around the toe of your mound, walking back and forth across your field, and see if your feet get wet. If they do, your system is in failure and you need to get something done with it. But you can also have an industry professional come out. They can come out and they can assess your system and say, you know what, everything's working good. Or, hey, let's clean these filters for you. Normal systems, maybe you get that done once a year. Packaged sewage treatment plants every 6 to 12 months, because there is more things in a sewage treatment plant to deal with. I mean, you've got fan motors, and you've got the aerator, and you've got relays and everything else in there that could start to cause you some problems. Regular system, you've got a pump and maybe an alarm that could cause you some issue. Okay, not all pumpers perform inspections, so typically we're looking at every 3 to 4 years as a rule of thumb for getting your septic tank sucked out. If you're abusing it, maybe you're getting it sucked out every year to keep it from backing up into your house. If you're really watching what you do, maybe you go 20 years. It's hard to say. Okay, your pumper can come out there and they can judge it and say, okay, well, you know what, we empty it today, but the level of sludge and scum that you had there, I'll see you in 6 years. Or, wow, change what you're doing. You're in some trouble here. Okay, but they don't all perform inspections. Talk to your pumper, see what they say. So here's a suck truck. Okay, so if you're getting the pumper to come out, this is what we're talking about. They got the hose here that they drop into your tank. Right, big holding tank. So if that's, say that can hold 5,000 gallons, and your septic tank holds your holding tank holds 5,000 gallons, perfect. Match made in heaven. All right. What to keep in mind with this is the vacuum right here. So when that tank is out at your place and they're sucking your tank out, this is where all the gases and everything else are going to be coming back out. When you have your vacuum running, it's blowing the hot air out to the side. That's exactly what this thing is doing. Okay? It's going to smell really bad. But when they're sucking your tank out, if you've got a concrete tank and you're out there and it sounds like they're sucking gravel up, that's portions of your concrete tank. The aggregate's starting to come out. Your tank is slowly degrading, and have them have a look at it, see if you need to address that right away, or if you've got some years to deal with yet. Something to keep in mind with the suck trucks: if you see a suck truck parked on the side of the road and it smells really bad and they've got sewage coming out of the back of that truck, get this information right here and report that. These guys, they're only allowed to do a few things with the sewage that they're pulling out of your house or out of your tank. They can take it to a sewage treatment facility. They can take it to a lagoon that's made for it. Some have their own lagoons. Most of them will go to a municipal lagoon. Or if they have permission from Alberta Environment, they might have a land spreading agreement where they're allowed to take this truck, go out to a piece of land, and they're allowed to spray the sewage onto that land. Now, each piece of land is only allowed to have one application of sewage on it every 3 years. What these trucks need to do is they go out there and they spray that sewage back and forth on this piece of land. When that truck is empty, they're expected to stop and walk back through everything they just sprayed and pick up everything that should have never been put in your tank. So your condoms, your feminine hygiene products, and all that. They're expected to pick all that up and take that to a treatment facility to be dealt with. Because if they don't, and Alberta Environment goes out there and goes through where they've got this land spread agreement, one, they'll lose that land spread agreement in a big hurry. Two, they're going to face some massive fines. So they're allowed to do it, but they have to watch what they're doing. They have to have permission and soil testing, a lot of other things. Tank pumping. When you're going to get your tank pumped out, try to do it in the spring and summer whenever possible. Avoid the cold winter months, especially if it's a mound type system, because we want to have that heat in the tank to keep the bacteria active, keep that bacteria hungry and alive. If you have problems with your system, you have to get the tank sucked out during the wintertime, okay. One thing to keep in mind is most pumpers will not fully empty that tank. They might leave a couple of inches of sludge at the bottom of that. That's not the pumper being lazy or ripping you off or anything. That's actually, call it a starter at that point. Call it seed stock, right? That, when you start using your septic system again, that is very bacteria rich, and it keeps your system working properly. A brand new system or a tank that's fully emptied takes a little while for it to recover, okay? There's never a need to scrub or disinfect the tank unless somebody's going in there for some reason. Most times there's no reason to go into your septic tank. If you got a pump down there, you should hopefully be able to retrieve it from the surface if it was installed with that in mind, but every now and then. Your pumper can assess the scum and sludge layers and let you know that, every year, every 3 years, every 5 years, whatever, for a pumping schedule. We pump the tank when the sludge and scum layers require it. Typically, if the scum's getting up into the manway or if the sludge is getting near the crossover where it spills through, we're going to get that sucked out. We're going to have a look at the baffle wall in between the two, make sure it's in good shape. And then if the pumper cleans filters and that sort of thing. Nothing stopping you as a homeowner from cleaning the filter. Just if you do pull it out to go wash it off, wash it over the primary chamber, not over the pump chamber. That way, anything you wash off it falls back in for the treatment, and you're not pumping that out to your system. Treatment field and mound maintenance. Avoid soil compaction. Okay, it doesn't say you can put so many pounds per square inch or anything like that. It just says don't do it. Okay, maintain a good vegetation cover. Keep surface water diverted away from your system. Plant trees a safe distance away. Do not plant a vegetable garden over top of your septic field, please, because all that sewage effluent is going into the soil there, and your plants that you have are drawing the water up out of the soil, so they're going to be drawing up your sewage. You're going to have some really big vegetables. However, they're going to have bacteria in them. Okay? And I find that probably 3-4 times a year still, unfortunately. Maintenance logs, just like you keep track of what you do with your car, keep maintenance logs saying what's been done in here. Keep it down in your mechanic room, do whatever you're going to do with it. If you're selling the property in the future, you can say, this is the maintenance that's been done on this septic system. Here's all the information I've got on it, and we actually took care of this. That gets in the record keeping. Okay, make sure you keep track of what you're doing, right? Who did it? Did they do a good job? That sort of thing. All that information you just want to have handy. Septic fields, septic mounds, same. Keep vehicles off of them, okay? Don't let people drive equipment over top of them. Don't drive your tractor over your septic field. Don't park vehicles on top of it. Don't use your septic mound as a ramp to launch your snowmobile over or anything like that, because it's all going to cause you problems. Limited events or activities over the system. Okay, we're not going to set up the party tent over top of your septic system. Be perfectly safe if it was installed properly, but you're going to get a lot of compaction. Same thing, we don't have livestock walking over the top of our septic fields or our septic mounds. It's even a good idea to keep your open discharges away from where your livestock is, because they're going to compact the ground and it's going to get really muddy really quick. Drain your surface water away as much as possible. Make sure your downspouts are not draining towards the septic system. Okay, all that roof water, let's get it going someplace else, because if it goes over top of your system, you might saturate it and cause problems. Grass and shallow rooted vegetation is fine over top of your septic fields. Don't allow stuff that has really long tap roots to grow there. Don't let shrubs, and especially like stuff like carraganas, grow over top of your septic systems, because those roots are going to go in there and plug everything off. The exception, of course, is the yak grade, because the piping is 4 inches above the forest floor. Troubleshooting. So if you got sewage backing up in your building, you're definitely going to want to know why. So possible causes. You have roots clogs in your pipes because we didn't keep the trees away. We'd have a blockage in the line. Maybe there's a belly in the line, that sort of thing. Your sewage line might be damaged. Maybe somebody came in and did an installation, bought another gas line through or what have you. Excess water from leaking fixtures or toilets. Right, it says here that a leaking toilet can bypass hundreds of gallons of water per day. Yep, absolutely. Could be that your pump has failed, or it could be that your system's frozen. This picture that just popped up, that's a distribution box that's clogged by roots. So if you remember back to that slide that I had towards the beginning where I said this doesn't show a typical septic system because it's really small, two really short laterals. There's a distribution box, and with all those roots in there, the sewage isn't going anywhere. It is going to stay in your tank, and then it's going to back up into your house. So what's the concerns? Well, those gases that are in your septic tank are going to start coming into your house. There's pathogens and viruses in there. It's going to do damage to your furnace, your water heater, other appliances because it's corrosive. And of course, you got that water, smelly water coming up into everything. So it's going to damage walls and insulation. Then you get fungus, mold, and other organisms that are going to be growing in there, and it's going to affect your electrical wires and gas lines. So we definitely want to address it right fast. So what can we do? Well, be cautious entering the building, obviously. Open some windows. Let's get some fresh air going there so you don't get sick. Should go without saying, but don't use any more water in the house until your septic system is corrected. Get the tank sucked out. The pumpers, if you got sewage in your basement, they will drop the hose in through a basement window if you ask. Get everything drawn down. Check to see if it's a power problem. It says wash the floor with disinfectant. Wash everything with disinfectant. Okay. Wash the floors, wash the walls. Even if it doesn't look like the sewage got onto the walls, wash the walls. Because you're going to have water vapor in there. Even if you don't necessarily see it, you can smell it. Okay. That's going to start getting mold growing in all kinds of places. If you got open floor joists, scrub all that. Scrub absolutely everything. This is when you go nuts with the bleach. Okay. Consult a professional. Find out why your system failed. Definitely get it addressed because it's just going to keep happening if you don't. Sewage surfacing in the yard. So you see that picture that's in the top right there? You got some white pipes coming out. Those are inspection ports, and that white milky stuff that you got, that's sewage effluent all over the place. That is what it looks like if your septic system is failing really bad. But when I suggested that you could walk around your system, and if your feet get wet, right, it's in failure. That's what happens before we get to this stage here. All right. Causes. More water going into the system than what the system can handle. The field might be blocked. The system itself might have been undersized right from the get-go. Right? You sized it based on 3 bedrooms. You added a couple more bedrooms, and now you've got so many people living in there. Your system's not sized for it. This is going to happen. Some controls, pumps might have failed, possibly. And then field needs to be replaced. Absolutely. Anybody that says, oh, just pump some oxygen in there and it's going to be good, I haven't seen it happen yet. Okay, you're going to be building a whole new septic system or converting your septic tank to a holding tank and paying for that hauling away. Here's a picture of a fiberglass tank where the bubbles are coming out of the sides there because it is failing. Concerns, we got the gases again, pathogens, viruses. It definitely attracts pets and contamination of the water and soil. If you've got an outside dog or you got an inside dog that you let out and you've got sewage in your yard, they are going to find it and they are going to roll in it because for some problem with evolution, dogs really love to roll around in sewage. So they're going to roll around in that. They're going to come into the house muddy and yeah, they found your sewage leak for you. So what do? Reduce water use, consult a professional, get a suck truck if needed. Restrict access to the area, make sure it's not flowing into any adjacent property. Basically, stop using your system because if it's surfacing, every bit of fluid that goes into there is going to keep surfacing. And if it's running across, contaminating other people's properties and that sort of thing, that's when you're going to start having some legal issues. Sewage odor indoors. Why do you get those indoors? It could be a sewage backup in the house. Your roof vent pipe can be frozen shut. It could be a dry plumbing trap, improper plumbing, sewage surfacing in the yard. It could also be a temperature inversion. So it gets really cold outside. And you see that we've got that, everything just kind of settles down to the surface. All the exhaust from your furnaces, the exhaust from cars, and everything else come down. Even the sewer gases coming through the vent at the top of your house are coming down. Okay, so you might have a smell outside just because of that. Okay. Roof vent pipe frozen shut on the house. Yep, when it's cold outside, that's possible, especially if it wasn't built properly in the first place. Give it a good smack, get rid of that hoarfrost that's there. Dry plumbing trap. If you don't have anything running into your floor drain, like a condensate drain for a furnace, for instance, your floor drain is going to dry out. The water's going to evaporate. You're going to get smells from there. So a lot of basements have a funky smell at it. That's sewer gas. Okay. What you can do if you got a trap that's not being used much, whether it's going to be a floor drain or you've got a laundry sink that never gets used, or you've got a bathroom downstairs with a shower that never gets used, or a tub, that sort of thing. Refill it with some water, and then you can use a little bit of oil in there. You can use linseed oil like we've got in the slide here, a little bit of vegetable oil, whatever. Just dump it in slow. That sits on top of the water and prevents that evaporation. But if water needs to get through, it can. Okay, because the concern with sewer odors is health concern, toxic, right? Flammable, explosive gases. If it builds up high enough, definitely an indication of a more serious problem. So clear the vents, fill the traps, consult a plumber if need be, have the tank sucked out if you think that it's backing up. Sometimes you can have a slow drain and the sewer kind of backs up a little bit, and then it eventually drains. Okay. It might not back up enough where you can see it, but you can definitely smell it because it might back up and fill the traps on your floor drain or your, basement shower, basement tub, or whatever the case might be. It might back up to that step, just not quite high enough to come up onto the floor. So that might be, an issue that you've got. Run some water through your traps. Sewage odor outdoors, sewage surfacing in the yard. Monitoring ports damaged or removed. Manhole cover, your tank lid might be open or not fastened down. Put the lid back on right away, please. Your field, mound, what have you, might be inoperable. It might be a thermal inversion. If you've got an open discharge, it might have just pumped out and you just happen to have the wind going the wrong way. Concerns, it tracks pests, tracks your pets, right? Contamination of water and soil. It's definitely a nuisance. If you got a bunch of sewer odors outdoors and you're on really small 1 acre lots and you got a failing system with the odors, your neighbors are going to know about it really quick and you're going to hear about it. You might even have a safety codes officer come and say hello. And then it's obviously an indication of more serious problems. So we want to check and replace any caps. Definitely get those lids on. Troubleshoot the system. What's going on with it? You see this picture here? That is a green ultra rib riser coming from a septic or a holding tank. And it's got plywood sitting on the top of it, just kind of haphazardly cut there and thrown there. That is not a proper tank lid. And if that is what yours looks like, please change it. If your septic alarm goes off, why does it go off? Well, it could be that your pump is unplugged. Could be that your pump is done. Could be the breaker is tripped. Could be your outlet pipe is broken, frozen. Could be too much groundwater coming in, any of those sort of things. What we want to try to do is have separate power sources. One power source for your pump, one for your alarm. So if you've got the type where it's got a duplex outlet out at your tank and everything's plugged into the same one, if you've got two supplies coming in there, there's a little jumper in between the top and the bottom that you can snap off. That way you can have two separate supplies going to two separate breakers. Because if your alarm and your pump are both on the same one, if your pump goes and overamps and trips the breaker, now you don't have power going to your alarm either. Now, the alarms do have a battery backup, which helps. But if you change the batteries in your battery backup alarm as often as you do the smoke detectors in your house, it probably is not working because you haven't changed it in years. Okay. Remember, every time the clocks change the batteries in your smoke alarms, change the one in the alarm on your septic system as well. And that is all the slides that I have. You can see for more information, you can email AOMA at info@aoma.com. You can phone the 877 toll-free number to get a hold of the ladies in the office there. If you have any questions whatsoever when it comes to septic, they can definitely help you out. If they don't have all the answers, they can definitely point you in the right direction. AOMA maintains a list of certified contractors in the province that can help out with the design or the install, do it completely for you. Some of them might, assist you with doing your own designs, that sort of thing. So they've got that list. They can either send you to the website or give you that information over the phone. Or if you have other questions for me beyond what we have time for today, you can definitely get a hold of them. They'll put you in touch with me, either or. But with that is the end of my presentation. And if anybody has any questions, I'm here for you.
Hey, Rick, I got one in the chat box. Is there a system to capture and utilize the treated water?
So there are ways of utilizing the recycled water. Now, when it comes to the water from your septic systems, not typically, because if you're going to be getting into that, you're going to have engineers involved, because now you're going to have to do a lot more treatment. You're going to have disinfection, probably some chemical additive, UV, that sort of thing. So there is some gray water reuse that you're able to do, and the codes are starting to catch up to that. But yeah, you're going to be looking at engineering involved. You're going to be looking at variances, and then the municipality has to buy in as well, because the municipality will have to set a bylaw on the testing of the water, and how often do you have to have it tested, who tests it, when do you submit it to the municipality. They have to have a procedure in place in order to make that happen. I don't think there's too many municipalities that have done that as of yet. Just simply applying it back into the ground is probably the best bet. There are some engineers that are designing irrigation systems, below ground irrigation systems, for like golf courses at the driving ranges and that sort of thing. So there is some potential for it, but on the residential scale, it's not cost effective.
I think you answered the second part of that question, Rick. It said, we are installing a muni system and it is a wetland-based system. Is there a smaller form of this for residential?
You're not going to really see it on a residential, because, like I said, the cost of just the entire design that you have to get into that, with all the engineering and whatnot that would be involved.
Okay, and then Teresa has a question. Are lagoon systems legal?
Lagoon systems are still in the standard of practice. If it was installed previously and it met the code of the day, then it's still fine. New lagoons follow everything that's in the standard of practice. So it's either got 100% compaction clay, or it's got a liner, and then we've got rules on freeboard depth and all that sort of thing on it, as well as distances to property lines and that sort of thing. There are municipalities in the province that have set bylaws outlawing lagoons, where you're not allowed to install a lagoon. So municipality can set a bylaw to say you can't do this. They can't set a bylaw that relaxes any of the codes. So they can't say, okay, well, the code says 300 feet to a property line, but we don't like that. We got a bylaw that says you can do 150 feet. They can't do that. They can come back and say, the 600-foot rule doesn't work in our area. We want 1,000-foot setback, and they can set a bylaw for that. So if the municipality doesn't have anything that says you can't do a lagoon, as long as you're following the standard of practice, have your permit and that sort of thing in play, you're good to go. You just don't see a lot of them down here. You normally see lagoons when we're getting up in the bush north of Grand Prairie is where I see the majority of those. Do you have any other questions, Sherry?
No, but Ben says thanks for the knowledge share. Very informative.
You're welcome.
Rick, Jenny Melhoff here. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you really good.
Excellent. Thank you so much for presenting to us this evening. Tons of knowledge. It was fabulous. I am curious if the provincial legislation has caught up with the new engineering. For example, Matrix is doing a lot of groundbreaking work in the septic world on discharge into waterways, considering that the federal government has removed a whole bunch of the navigable waterways off of the licensing requirements for septic. Has the provincial government caught up with that legislation change?
Well, the provincial government's moving at the speed of government for a lot of this stuff. If it's not in the standard of practice, then we need to start looking at an alternative solution. So the standard of practice says that everything is going to go in either a holding tank to get hauled away to treatment, or it's going to go into the soils. It does not allow for additional treatment going into wetlands or waterways and that sort of thing. However, if there's engineering involved and a proposal comes in that says, this is what we want to do, this is how it's going to work, here's the studies, here's all the information, then there's a potential to issue a variance to allow for that to happen. And that's on the smaller systems. When we start getting up into the larger systems where we're getting up over, like, say, 9 cubic meters a day, then that all falls under Alberta Environment and it has nothing to do with the Safety Codes Act.
Further to that, Rick, if you don't mind, development permits, and a lot of them are linked to water requirements for fire service suppression. Is there an opportunity to license, say, lagoon systems or private homeowner systems, et cetera, to act as their water suppression system for emergency services in the event of fires?
The building code says that you have to have X amount of fire water available for the building, depending on the use of the building, the size of the building, and so forth. So there's a lot of calculations to be done with that that says we need to have this much water available where a pumper is able to connect to a connection and utilize that water. So for us to consider that, you can say a lagoon could be used for that. If it's a small, most lagoons are going to be too small for that because we've got a freeboard depth of only a couple of feet of sewage inside of that. That way, if anybody ever fell into there, they can just stand up and they don't drown in it, hopefully, right, including children. So the volumes itself would be low. The other problem is now we've got bacteria and viral laden water that you're going to haul up and then you're going to aerosolize it on the other side. So you'd have problems with the WCB would definitely have something to say about that, because now anybody that's going there and fighting that fire is in the area, getting that steam, getting that aerosolized water sprayed onto them, they're getting covered in the bacteria and viruses.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I'm just looking for some very creative rural solutions to some of the urban problems that are now making their way into the rural landscape. So I really appreciate your feedback on some of these issues. Thank you.
No worries. I have a lot of conversations in a week about fire water, unfortunately. Do we have any other questions?
I don't have any more in the chat. Nope.
I just have one thing, Rick.
Sure, yeah.
You mentioned the two receptacles, the duplex receptacle at the pump and the alarm.
Yep.
I don't know if it's if the electrical code's different for sewage systems, but that little bar you break off.
Yep.
When you do that, both sides of the breaker have to be tied together. Like if you go down in your basement and you see panels where the two like for your plugs in your kitchen where they're joined.
Yeah.
Those have to be tied together. So if one trips, it'll trip the other one. Just something to think about.
Okay, yeah, I'll run that past the electrical SEOs when I get back to the office tomorrow, because the direction I was given previously is do just that. You have two separate wires going out there. One goes to the top, one goes to the bottom. You have that broke apart. They go to separate breakers. That way, if one trips,
Okay.
the other one's still got power.
If you
That
break it
way
on
you
both
can-
sides, maybe if you break it on both sides.
Yeah, I've never actually
Find out-
done it before. So
Yeah,
yeah, if there's two sides, then you definitely need to. Yeah,
Yeah,
'Cause
maybe
you'd have to
find out.
separate those, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll check with my electrical guys tomorrow. Yeah.
Because the challenge there would be if one trips, the other one will get tripped too when they're tied together.
Yeah, no, we definitely need to keep those separated. However that's done.
Yeah.
The
there's
one
ways.
thing I haven't had time for in my life is to take another apprenticeship.
All right. Thanks a lot. This was great.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, anybody that might still be out there listening, just get a hold of the association. They'll definitely put you in touch with me or somebody else that is more knowledgeable, and we can go from there.